Good afternoon, spaceflight enthusiasts, and welcome to another Angry Bulletin. And we're back to talking about Blue Origin. And although most of the news about them has been quite positive, and we're going to cover some of the latest when it comes to their proposed spaceflight technology, that is to say, their upgraded rockets, upgraded engines, etc. A lot of the time, when it comes to these companies, it goes hand in hand with environmental controversy. And in this case, these folks have really stirred up a lot of problem with the Florida community that surrounds their facilities, which, by the way, are extremely close to Cape Canaveral's facilities, who have overall an extremely good reputation for maintaining the environmental integrity of the area that they occupy. At one time, Cape Canaveral was one of the most critical reserves for bald eagles in the United States. At the time when the bald eagle population was in significant decline, Cape Canaveral had a very large population with many nesting pairs. And that's just one example of all of the positive things that have happened for the environment side by side with this space facility. However, when it comes to Blue Origin and SpaceX, it seems that they might be trying to cut some corners, or even if they aren't, they're definitely stirring up controversy. Of course, we all know about the stuff that's been happening with SpaceX, but now we have a new problem with Blue Origin stirring up lots of trouble. And this is not just trouble with environmentalists or left-wing tree huggers or anything along those lines. These are the people who live in this region, who've been working very hard to clean up the swamps in this area that have been subjected to a lot of toxic contamination over the years. They made lots of progress with it, and now it appears that Blue Origin is about to ruin a lot of that, or at least that's what some people would like us to believe. But is that true? And also, assuming that it isn't, assuming Blue Origin is going to be able to continue with their work regardless of environmental controversy, what have they really accomplished? What is Blue Origin working on for the future? Their new super rocket, the so-called 9x4 New Glenn, or whatever that's going to be called in the long run. Is it a Starship Killer, the way some people are saying, or is it a potential replacement for SLS? This is the Indian River Lagoon, as seen from the Indian River Lagoon Scenic Byway and all of the historic attractions that exist around it. A remarkable region of natural beauty that Florida has been trying very hard to clean up. And Jeff Bezos's aerospace company Blue Origin has applied for a permit to dump 500,000 gallons of wastewater each day into the Indian River Lagoon. The proposal has, unsurprisingly, caused quite a stir amongst communities that have spent years and millions of dollars restoring this sensitive ecosystem. A Blue Origin spokesperson told Gizmodo, which, by the way, they're the ones who broke this story, that it is seeking renewal of an existing permit that has been in place for 5 years, so this is something they've been doing for a while, and that the company is committed to maintaining responsible and compliant operations. But for many local residents and community leaders, this is the first time they're seeing the details in black and white, and they are not happy about it. Quote, "The Indian River Lagoon is already fighting for its life, according to a petition on change.org. Decades of nutrient pollution, algae blooms, seagrass collapse, habitat loss, and record manatee deaths have pushed this fragile ecosystem to the edge, and now it faces a new threat, and it's one we cannot ignore." Now, of course, I'm not really sure about how accurate this is, because it's not exactly a new threat if they're just renewing an existing permit. But then again, if we're talking about Blue Origin substantially expanding their manufacturing capability, which is something they're definitely doing, then yeah, perhaps this is a new threat. The Brevard County Commission will discuss Blue Origin's proposal during its regular weekly meeting on Tuesday evening, just a few days from now, according to Fox 35 Orlando. The commission will vote on whether to request a public meeting from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, or DEP, due to residents' concerns. Gizmodo, again, the folks who broke this story, reached out to Brevard County Commissioner Katie Delaney and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection for comment, but did not receive responses, at least not by time of publication. So to give you a little bit more information about the Indian River Lagoon, it's a 251 kilometer or 156 mile estuary that makes up 40% of Florida's eastern coast, home to more than 4,300 species, 50 of which are threatened or endangered. It's one of the most biodiverse estuaries in the U.S. Local governments, including Indian River County and Brevard County, have been working to protect and restore the Indian River Lagoon for years. One of the main threats to this ecosystem is degraded water quality due to factors such as nutrient pollution, harmful algae blooms, and wastewater pollution. Community members and leaders have raised concerns that Blue Origin's continued dumping could reverse the progress that they've made. Quote, "That's really troubling to me, especially when we are spending so much money as a community on the half-cent sales tax and the Save the Indian River Lagoon tax," according to Brevard County Commissioner Katie Delaney. These initiatives have helped the county raise $417.5 million to support the lagoon's restoration. The permit Blue Origin is seeking would allow the company to operate an industrial wastewater treatment facility, which would discharge almost 500,000 gallons of treated wastewater and 0.015 million gallons of untreated wastewater. So the vast majority of this water is treated, although I'm not sure exactly what all of that means, but they will release all of that into an on-site stormwater pond per day. This wastewater would then be discharged into the Indian River Lagoon. The good news is that the draft permit outlines strict prohibitions, limitations, and monitoring activities aimed at mitigating Blue's impact on the ecosystem. But still, many Space Coast residents fear for the future of the Indian River Lagoon, not to mention the wildlife and industry that it supports. Quote, "Our homes, our wildlife, our water, our economy, and our future depend on a healthy lagoon," again, according to the Change.org petition. The Florida DEP intends to issue the permit as drafted unless public comments lead to changes. The outcome will signal how far Florida is willing to go to protect one of its most fragile ecosystems, even if it means placing new limits on a high-profile Space Coast operator. And incidentally, if you're talking about all the comments that one would see on a Gizmodo article, which is usually watched by tech enthusiasts, well, just about all the comments are pretty negative. Nobody seems to want this, and most of the comments seem to be made by locals, by people who live in this immediate area. So all of that having been said, is it likely that somebody, that the government, perhaps Florida government or perhaps even the EPA, are going to put the brakes on whatever Blue Origin is trying to do? Well, I have my doubts. Neither the Florida government nor the current administration have much of a history of putting the brakes on any kind of industrial development in order to protect environmental concerns. Generally, that is just not what this government tends to do. Again, in my opinion, environmentalists have a tendency to overreact to a lot of perceived threats. And again, this is something that Blue Origin has allegedly been doing for years anyway. But then again, they are about to really step up their production compared to what they've been doing for the last 20 years. Blue Origin has announced a series of upgrades to New Glenn, as most of us are probably aware, designed to increase payload performance and launch cadence while enhancing reliability. The enhancements span propulsion, structures, avionics, reusability, and recovery operations, and will be phased into upcoming New Glenn missions beginning along with New Glenn 3, so the third launch will have at least some of these modifications. One of the primary enhancements includes higher performing engines on both stages. Total thrust for the 7 BE4 booster engines is increasing from 3.9 million pounds of thrust to 4.5 million pounds of thrust. BE4 has already demonstrated 625,000 pounds of thrust on the test stand at current propellant conditions and will achieve 640,000 pounds later this year. So in other words, before the end of December, with propellant subcooling increasing the current thrust capability from the existing 550,000 pounds of thrust. So this is a major increase in the BE4's capabilities. The total thrust of the two BE3Us, unlike SpaceX, New Glenn has different engines on the second stage, engines that are powered by a totally different fuel system too, hydrolox instead of methalox. In any event, the total thrust on these two engines is increasing from the original design of 320,000 pounds of thrust to 400,000 pounds of thrust over the next few missions. And apparently, the BE3U has already demonstrated 211,658 pounds of thrust on the test stand. And there are two of these engines on the second stage, so yeah, 400,000 pounds of thrust sounds very, very doable. These enhancements will immediately benefit customers already manifested on New Glenn to fly to destinations including low Earth orbit, the moon, and beyond. Additional vehicle upgrades include a reusable fairing to support increased flight rates, an updated lower-cost tank design, and a higher-performing and reusable thermal protection system to improve turnaround time. The next chapter in New Glenn's roadmap is a new Super Heavy class rocket. Named after the number of engines on each stage, the New Glenn 9x4 is designed for a subset of missions requiring additional capacity and performance. The vehicle carries over 70 metric tons to low Earth orbit. Once again, this is incredible, given the fact that Starship, with 33 engines on the first stage and 6 engines on the second, is only capable of 100 metric tons, and it hasn't reached that yet. 70 metric tons with a total of 13 engines, it doesn't even seem possible. It can also deliver 14 metric tons directly to geosynchronous orbit and over 20 metric tons to trans-lunar injection, which, by the way, Starship can do neither of those things. Additionally, the 9x4 vehicle will feature a larger 8.7 meter fairing. This indeed seems like a Starship killer, but is it really? Well, the first question is, how the hell is Blue Origin thinking that they're going to be able to deliver 70% of what Starship can deliver to low Earth orbit with only 13 engines as opposed to 39 engines? Well, here's the key difference between the two rockets. Starship is a 100% reusable transportation system. At least that's the idea behind it. Therefore, it needs to be constructed a lot heavier, not just on the first stage, but especially on the second stage. Most rockets can afford to get away with extremely lightweight construction, either thin sheets of aluminum with equally light tanks or some type of 3D printing or carbon fiber. All of these different production methods produce a second stage with an extremely low dry mass. In the case of New Glenn, for example, even though it has a 7-meter fairing and theoretically the capability of delivering 40 tons all the way to low Earth orbit, the total mass of New Glenn's second stage is between 25 to 28 tons. Starship is quadruple that mass, and so anything you are trying to haul up to orbit that weighs that much is going to require that many more engines on your first stage, and also an extremely heavy and robust first stage that's capable of carrying a very heavy and robust upper stage. That being the case then, Starship is immensely heavy, even compared to the New Glenn 9x4, even though their heights are fairly comparable and even the fairing size is roughly comparable. Most observers anticipate that the dry mass of Starship is going to be much, much higher than the dry mass of the New Glenn 9x4. Therefore, it requires far fewer engines in order to achieve the same type of payload that Starship is capable of, or well, maybe not the same, but 70% of what it's theoretically capable of doing. And not only that, because the second stage is so much lighter, and in addition to that, it has massive amounts of propellant and 4 engines to push it, it has the ability to deliver massive interplanetary payloads. As the estimates say, about 20 metric tons all the way to translunar injection, whereas Starship absolutely cannot do this. And the reason is Starship essentially runs out of gas by the time it delivers the entire upper stage to low Earth orbit, once again, because the upper stage is so damn big. It's made out of stainless steel, meaning that it's a lot heavier, and so therefore it just isn't set up to go interplanetary, not without refueling. Refueling is an absolute essential for Starship, not so much for this New Glenn super rocket. But that being said, if you construct your upper stage out of far more lightweight materials, then your ability to have a heat shield on this upper stage is significantly reduced. It's going to be a lot tougher to have a resilient heat shield on a lightweight and rather fragile upper stage, whereas Starship is heavy, made out of stainless steel, and capable of carrying a heat shield. New Glenn is not set up for 100% reusability. It's not a completely reusable transportation system, whereas Starship is, meaning that ultimately, in the long run, Starship may have a much, much better cost per kilogram and much better cost per launch than New Glenn will ever have. Once again, though, that's totally theoretical. We have two pretty different philosophies from the two companies, and time will tell which ends up being the superior system. Starship, of course, has a head start with a lot of test flights under its belt, but then again, this 9x4 rocket is just a modified version of what already works, a modified New Glenn, whereas Starship is a totally new animal. So if New Glenn isn't the same as Starship, and it may not be a replacement or a better rocket than Starship, is it at least better than SLS? Surely it's better than NASA's job-creating machine that costs billions of dollars per launch to get to the moon. Well, that isn't 100% the case, at least not yet. And for those of you who are thinking, oh, here he goes again, he's going to defend SLS, what's wrong with this guy? Well, it just comes down to the basic numbers. SLS is designed to launch Orion all the way to the moon. Orion weighs way more than 20 metric tons, and New Glenn at maximum in reusable format, and I kind of question its ability to really do this, but still, according to Blue Origin, they can pull this off, so we'll take them at their word. This rocket can fling 20 metric tons out to translunar injection and no more, whereas Orion weighs substantially more than that, meaning that if the 9x4 New Glenn can launch Orion at all, it's going to have to be in expendable format. Once again, you're just back to using an expendable rocket to get Orion all the way out to the moon. So why not just toss Orion on the scrap heap? Let's get something better, something lighter, something that's still reusable. Well, actually, Orion is reusable, and sure, I'm all for designing a new human-rated ship that's capable of going all the way to the moon and back, but that's not an easy thing to do. Anything that goes to the moon has to have a robust life support system, first of all, something that's capable of keeping its passengers alive for at least a month, which is something Apollo couldn't do. It's something the Crew Dragon can't do. It's something that no current human-rated spacecraft can do except for Orion. It also has to be capable of surviving a re-entry at lunar return speeds, thousands of kilometers per hour faster than traditional space capsules have to hit the atmosphere. This means temperatures that are hundreds of degrees hotter than an ordinary space capsule experiences when it's re-entering the atmosphere from low Earth orbit. That means a much more resilient heat shield that requires a lot of work, a lot of development, and a lot of testing. Right now, Orion is the only human-rated spacecraft capable of taking people all the way out to lunar orbit and bringing them back to Earth safely. Nobody, not even China, has anything that's capable of doing that, at least not yet. Nor does the West have anything even in development that's capable of doing that. A human-rated Starship, at best, can carry people to orbit. Its heat shield cannot handle lunar re-entry speeds. In fact, there's some question as to whether or not it can really effectively survive re-entry from low Earth orbit without doing a lot of damage to the rocket. Well, okay, so we keep SLS around for maybe Artemis 3 and then dump it, right? Or maybe Artemis 4 or 5 at maximum, as Jared Isaacman is saying? Well, yeah, I would say that's probably a good plan, assuming that we actually have low Earth orbit refueling mastered by then. And I think there's a lot of reason to believe that it will be mastered by then, but if it isn't, then SLS Block 1B, which is going to be unveiled as of Artemis 4, has capabilities far exceeding that of the basic SLS that we see today. And the reason for that is the second stage of SLS is going to be upgraded with what's called an Exploration Upper Stage, or EUS. It will have 4 RL-10 engines as opposed to the 1 RL-10 engine that it has right now on what's called the ICPS, the Interim Cryogenic Propulsion Stage. And the reason it's called interim is because the Exploration Upper Stage was always supposed to be propelling the second stage of SLS from the beginning. It just took a lot longer, big surprise there, to get the EUS into operation. Once the Block 1B is operational, this thing will be able to haul almost 40 metric tons to the moon in one go, one launch, double the capability of what the New Glenn 9x4 can fling to the moon. That means it can carry Orion and over 10 tons of additional cargo carried inside 286 cubic meters of additional space in an area called the Universal Stage Adapter, or USA, being currently developed by Dynetics. As a matter of fact, I think they've already completed their work on that, meaning that SLS is going to have some pretty impressive capabilities in one launch. It will just be ridiculously expensive. If we have low Earth orbit refueling mastered, then there's no reason to have a one-launch solution for these kinds of heavy payloads. But if we don't, then Block 1B will have superior capabilities to any other rocket that's currently in service. I'm not saying that this ridiculously expensive behemoth is the rocket of the future, but until we have a viable alternative, it's still the best thing we've got. So once again, I want to emphasize that even though Blue Origin has accomplished incredible things lately, and I've had good things to say because they've demonstrated, finally, after all this time of not launching anything into orbit, they've demonstrated what they're truly capable of. And I think the 9x4, as it is called, I'm sure they're going to call it something different as time goes on, but this New Glenn super rocket is going to have some very promising capabilities. But as we have seen, it's still not really capable of sending the amount of mass out to cislunar space that Artemis needs it to. The Orion is just too big and too heavy. But then again, if you make a smaller ship, then are you really going to be able to carry the numbers of people that you need to with each mission? I mean, the Orion can only carry 4 people as it is. Do we want to really scale this down further? And if New Glenn in expendable mode is capable of driving the Orion all the way out to the moon, are we really gaining anything? Is expending a massive New Glenn super rocket going to be any cheaper than expending an SLS? Well, maybe, but I'd like to see proof of that, to be honest. Expending one giant rocket as opposed to expending another giant rocket doesn't seem to be a huge leap ahead as far as I'm concerned. And so what this may mean for the long run is SLS being the only proven human-rated rocket capable of driving large amounts of payload out to cislunar space, along with at least 4 people, and the Block 1B capable of delivering double the payload out to cislunar space that New Glenn can, or the 9x4 version that is. At least in expendable mode, it could be that SLS is still going to have a role to play with Artemis for a while, until we can actually master the art of low Earth orbit refueling. If we can manage to do that, then the ability to carry large payloads out to the moon becomes very simple. Lots of different rockets will be able to do it. Even Vulcan Centaur, if it can fully refuel its Centaur upper stage, it could drive more than 20 tons out to lunar orbit, actually. Probably closer to 30 tons, the equivalent of what SLS can do now. So that, in my opinion, is the missing technology that is necessary to really eclipse SLS and to make it a thing of the past. Until we actually have that capability, until low Earth orbit refueling becomes a routine and proven technology, I think we're going to be stuck with SLS for a while to come. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, please consider supporting this channel on Patreon. You get access to early release content, some exclusive stuff, and also our Discord server. Thanks again, and until next time, stay angry about space.